shop.
Welcome back, guys. It's time for another episode of What's in the Shop. This time, I based this episode, well, I should say my inspiration for this episode came from a regular who brought in a box of CDs and wanted to trade a box of CDs. And I was a little hesitant, like, I don't know, dude, I'm not really hip on CDs. But it was a box full of reggae CDs. When I opened the box and looked inside, whoa, this guy said he didn't like reggae. How on earth did he end up with some of these classic gems we're going to talk about today? And one of my all-time favorites was in the box as well. But hey, let's not waste any more time. Let's get started on this and let's break this down. So first up, one of the gems in the box, my favorite Bob Marley, should say album, I almost said CD. My favorite Bob Marley album, Exodus. Fantastic album. Made it on Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time. I mean, no small wonder, is it? Funnily enough, as well, I'm not the only one who thinks this is a great album, because in 1999, Time magazine said it was the #1 album of, I don't know if I'd go that far, but it is classic. And for those keeping notes, or who only own one Bob Marley album in their collection, which is probably Legend, you should own more. This album is featured, has more songs on Legend than any other in Bob Marley's catalog. So that tells you what a great album this is. He got the name, well, let me back up here. This was released in 77, right at the height of the whole punk rock movement and everything. And obviously it went down a storm. And this album actually was the album that got Bob worldwide stardom. You have to remember, a year before, Bob was in Jamaica and was heavily into politics and everything. And in December of 76, someone tried to assassinate Bob. And some people say it was because he was tied to politics or one certain politician. Others say some of Bob's friends and members of his group were involved in a horse racing scam, and that almost got Bob killed. But whatever the reason, Bob decided it was time to move on, and he went to England, recorded the album. It just became a huge success. Toured all over Europe. Everybody was loving Bob at this time. In fact, Bob's biggest crowd he ever played to was outside of Jamaica. It was in Italy when he played to over 100,000 people. But we're talking about Exodus. My favorite Bob Marley album has Heathen, Natural Mystic, Jammin', come on, Wait in Vain, Three Little Birds, One Love. It's just a classic album. Where did he get the name of this? Speaking of the politicians again, there was, don't ask me because I'm not up on Jamaican politicians or Jamaican politics, but one of the people he admired at the time before he was shot said, "We know where we're going." So Bob, who was somewhat of a religious man, thought of like the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. And this was his reply to what the politician was saying, because obviously they know where they were going. Bob referring to biblical things with the Exodus, and this was his reply, like, and they know where they're going. So anyway, the album is interesting because it was divided into two parts, really. Side one deals with kind of religious politics and religious views, whereas side two is a little more carnal, which kind of goes opposed to some of the religious views, but it's about keeping faith and keeping your woman. Fantastic album. What can I say? Just Bob Marley, Exodus, happened to be in that box, and just a great album. Oh, I forgot to mention, Exodus came out in 77. It's interesting to know, only 3 years before, in 1974, was Marley's first hit. So it's weird to think this album was so big and the world had only known about Bob Marley outside of Jamaica for 3 years. And then he exploded all over the place. Let's move on. Next up, everybody loves Bob. I'm very fond of this next guy, Mr. Gregory Isaacs. This here is Night Nurse. Came out 82, sorry, I take that back, 82. Huge for Gregory in the 80s. Let me back up a little bit and tell you about, well, let me say this. The album was not a big hit. I think it only got to number 32 in the British charts, but it was big enough to make a huge impact in the clubs and radio. He had a lot of radio play and club play with this, and a big enough social impact in Britain that they named a cold and flu medicine after him because of this, called Night Nurse. Anyway, about Gregory, he was nicknamed the Cool Ruler because of his vocal style, and he was also known as the Lonely Lover because he could sing love songs unlike anybody else. And he's one of the most prominent singers in Jamaica, well, from Jamaica, in reggae music. Believe it or not, Gregory Isaacs has over 71 albums of original material. When you count in compilations that's been done on Gregory Isaacs, it clocks in at over 500 titles. That is huge. He is an undeniable reggae king, classic star, whatever you want to say. Like I said, the track itself only got up to number 32 in the UK charts, but several years later, 15 years later to be exact, in 1997, Simply Red covered it with Sly and Robbie. But Mr. Gregory Isaacs, fantastic singer, great album. Well, I need to go back and reiterate, this started his height of his 80s period. You have this and Out There, which came after Night Nurse, which many consider Gregory's best stuff that he did during the 80s. He was pretty big in the 70s, but in the 80s he blew it up with this, and in no small part help from cough syrups and flu medicines. Moving on, this band wasn't in the box, I have to confide, but they're worthy of talking about just because they were the first reggae band ever to get a Grammy. And I'm talking about Black Uhuru. Now this here is Puma Jones, who's actually from South Carolina, who joined the band. This is not the original lineup, but this is considered the classic lineup. Puma Jones, Michael Rose, and Ducky Simpson is who makes up this classic lineup. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I want to say this is almost like album number 4 or 5 of Black Uhuru. This came out in 81. Thing is, the year before, they recorded the album Since Amelia, which got international attention. Then this came out and likewise blew them up worldwide. Well, I say worldwide, became massively popular in Europe as well as America, and they are native Jamaicans, but not Puma Jones, of course, as I just said. But this album blew them up sky high. Again, this is one of those bands that they weren't massively popular, or this style of reggae that they were playing wasn't massively popular in Jamaica, but it had more of a overseas, how do you want to say, je ne sais quoi, that people were picking up on, that they seemed to like. These guys too were a little bit, not militant, but heavily into politics and stuff. But they think the reason why, or many people attribute this, the reason why they got so popular in this phase with Puma Jones is because bringing a female into the fold kind of softened it up a bit and was able to sing about stuff like love and relationships here and there. Not all the time, but it gave Black Uhuru a nice edge and made them wildly popular. Now, like I said, they did win a Grammy, but it was for the album that came right after this in 1985. Was it? Yes, they won the Grammy in 85. I think this album actually came out in 84, but it was for this, Anthem. First reggae band to ever win a Grammy, and this was the album that did it in the Grammys in 1985, I believe. Or maybe it was 1984, excuse me. But what the heck? It's the first one that won, so that's all that matters. Coming up next, these guys actually were in the box. Great band, and they too were nominated for a Grammy. Don't remember if they won, but I know they were nominated. No, they did not win, but they were nominated as well. 3 years later in 1987. However, this is the Itals, and this one is called Early Recordings, 1971 to 1979. The thing about the Itals, who are the Itals? What is Ital? You hear that a lot, right? Ital. Actually, it's a term used for part of the Rastafarian diet. It's really vital, but they drop the V, and it's just Ital. Mainly to accentuate I, like they always say, the I3s, I and I. It's to express their connection with earth, nature, and all around in the Rastafarian religion. But Ital is basically just a natural food diet and so forth. But this Itals, the Itals, were a great harmony band in Jamaica during the 70s. And a lot of these recordings, like the title says, between 71 to 79, were done for a bunch of different little labels there in Jamaica. And when it kind of fell out of favor in kind of the late 70s of that kind of harmonizing group, harmonizing in reggae, they were signed to an American label, and they got massively way more popular in America than they were at that time in Jamaica, because I guess it's more pleasing to the ear with the harmonies for Western listeners in America and in Europe. This has, of course, in this time, amazing track. Amazing. Every song on here is a knockout. Great record. Great CD. If you want it, come and get it fast, because I don't think it's going to stay around here long. The Itals. Amazing. Another CD that was in the box. One of my faves, man. One of my all-time faves right here coming up is Toots The Maytals. Who is Toots The Maytals? Well, truth be told, if it weren't for Toots Hibbert, we wouldn't have reggae. Why, you say? Because in 1968, they put out a single called Do the Reggae. And that was the first time the word reggae was heard outside of Jamaica and actually put on vinyl in a song. So everybody just picked up on that word, used it as that type of genre of music from Jamaica. So we owe a lot to Toots. Also got to point out about Toots is, you may not know who Toots is, but I'm sure you've heard some of his songs even before you knew who Toots was. The Clash, they did Pressure Drop. You may have heard the Specials doing Monkey Man. Those are all Toots songs. So you may have already known Toots without knowing Toots. And it's also interesting to note the guy we talked about earlier, Bob Marley, in Punk Reggae Party, he sings about Toots. Everybody loves Toots. It's also been said, well, Rolling Stone said Toots was, well, they named him as one of the greatest singers of all time. And rightfully so. This guy's so full of soul. It was actually Robert Christgau of, what was he, with the Village Voice, who said he was the closest thing we have to Otis Redding left on this earth. Sadly, Toots died, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, or maybe less. I lost time with all this stuff that's going on. But he was a great singer, so full of soul and just spirit and a vibe, fantastic. A lot of people say, a lot of critics say, there's a lot of like gospel tinge stuff in the Toots stuff of the 70s, actually. And there's a reason for that, because Toots used to sing in a Baptist church or in Baptist services. And he also used to cut hair, and sometimes when he would finish cutting hair, he would sing, and people would come to hear him sing, and they just loved his soulful voice. And of course, it's undeniable, on several of the albums, he sings about biblical things. But anyway, what I have here is Toots The Maytals. This is a compilation of their two breakout albums, Funky Kingston and In the Dark. Both came out in 73. And actually, this CD here, Rolling Stone rated this CD with both those albums, gave it a full 5 stars. Why not? Let me tell you a little bit about this, though. It's interesting. They were signed to Island Records outside of Jamaica. Island Records run by Chris Blackwell. Well, I should back up. 1972 or 73. The previous year before Funky Kingston came out, Toots had a track, and they may have actually been in the movie of The Harder They Come, and that set the world stage for reggae, put them on the world stage, I should say. But when they put their debut, well, it wasn't their debut, but their first international release in '73 with Funky Kingston, and Chris Blackwell kind of, you know, wanted to push them in the right directions to give them international stardom. So Toots' first international album, the Funky Kingston, was in '73. Guess who else's album was in '73 that got him international stardom? Outside of Jamaica, I should say. Bob Marley's. Can you believe it? Bob Marley's in the fire. I mean, sorry, Bob Marley's in the fire. Bob Marley's in the Wailers Catch a Fire. Is it any coincidence? Both those guys on the same label, run by the same man, same year. Interesting to note, isn't it? Now, Funky Kingston came in two different versions. The original in '73 was all original tunes. In '75, they re-released the album with a different cover, and it was actually kind of like a singles compilation. And of course, that version became massively popular. He toured with The Who in 1975. Funky Kingston and In the Dark were recorded around the same time. So the songs sound kind of like they were recorded at the same time, because they were very soulsy, a lot of spirit, a lot of conviction, just fantastic stuff. Out of the two, I have to admit, although Funky Kingston is good, I like the other one that's on here, In the Dark. Here, I'll show you these two little pictures here. You've already seen them on here. But In the Dark, fantastic. Got to be there. Actually, Robert Christgau said, what a great way to open up the album, because it was like a roll call for heaven, with full of conviction and just great spirit. And it is, you know. All Music Guide, which had some very nice things to say about Toots and stuff. It was really nice what they said about this, about In the Dark in particular. It said the Maytals hit the mark with every song on this collection. Like the best of the blues, gospel, and soul, they turned the struggle into strength. And then All Music went on to say, again, about this fantastic album, In the Dark, if the blues felt as good as they sound here, people would be lining up to get their dose as well. What more can I say, guys? Toots and the Maytals, Funky Kingston, In the Dark, fantastic. I'm so grateful for the guy who came in and brought in these CDs. And of course, there's more. I have some from Peter Tosh and some other compilations, and more Gregory Isaacs and more Bob Marley and stuff that was in the box, and more Toots. But I just wanted to point all these out that have some fantastic titles in right now on CD. If you're a reggae lover, undeniable classics that everyone should own. And thanks for joining me today, and every time you show up here on What's in the Shop. Again, if you need to get in touch, you know where to find me, noisyrecordsmx@hotmail.com. Likewise, beep, 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 beep. Send a direct message here through Instagram. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a message or get in touch with me that way. Again, thanks so much, everybody. Hope to see you soon. Keep on rocking.